Welcome back, everybody, to the Life Midwest podcast. This is episode 6. Hope you're all having a great week, or have had a great week, since this is technically Saturday, because we're totally live here at the Life Midwest. I'm your host, Kevin, alongside my buddy, Wes.
Hello.
Wes, what are we talking about this week?
This week, we're talking about a whole lot of stuff that all has to do with decentralization.
What does decentralization mean?
Two different people. Decentralization means different things. Specifically, what we're talking about here today is the transfer or delegation of multiple authorities rather than one central authority. We can look at it as far as government goes. We can look at it in the form of searching for employment. We can look at it in how we receive our money. And we can look at it, the platforms we use. Decentralization is literally just moving from one to many.
But because everyone has a different definition of decentralization, most people talk about it to associate with this laissez-faire approach offered by libertarianism and libertarian thought. We want to clarify that we're talking about a bit of a more nuanced definition of decentralization, technology, labor, things like that. We will get into the government aspect. And because of that, I want to preface it with this. Our goal is to be as apolitical as possible. We are not pushing an ideology here. We're explaining how decentralizing can be good for our future as humans without being biased towards any of the ideas or terms discussed or brought up today. So we approach this with an open mind. We ask that you have an open mind with it. So I want to open it up by giving an example of decentralization here. And the one I was explaining to Wes this morning on our call is that it's, you're familiar with cloud services, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that you have a phone, you have a tablet, and you have a computer. And maybe 15, 20 years ago, you would have your phone, and we didn't really have tablets weren't mainstream. Let's say 10 years ago, you had your phone, you had your tablet, you had a computer, right? And the phone, everything had kind of different parts of life that it filled in. Your phone was what you used for phone calls. Your tablet was maybe what you used for reading and web browsing. And your computer was more so used to store things. Your photos, family memories, movies, things like that. Well, now, because of cloud technology, everything is decentralized. You can access those things from anywhere, and it's not just a matter of, I have to wait until I get home on my tablet to reply to that email. There's that, it's almost like there's a level of continuity there that decentralizes your data, in this case. Would that be an accurate example, Wes?
Yeah, I think that's one of the interpretations of decentralization, and it's very much a keyword that a lot of the tech companies would use, is we are decentralizing from this monolithic company or whatever. So back in the day, you had basically Microsoft or Apple to choose from. You still kind of have that, but you now have Chrome OS, and Android's getting to the point, and iOS is getting to the point where you don't actually have to use a computer. But iCloud's a great example of decentralization. You might own a Windows computer, but have an iPhone, and those two things don't connect. So now you're not stuck in saving all your files locally to your PC. If you don't have storage on your PC, you don't have to upgrade your PC and keep it there. You have these options, these cloud services, these other ways you can store your information. It's basically just you went from one means to more than one mean. There's options, and it's based on the user's needs rather than the creator's design.
Based on the user's needs rather than the creator's design. I think that's going to be a really, really important phrase to keep in mind here as we go through today's episode. The user's needs rather than the creator's design. Keep that in mind, folks. Really, keep that in mind. So that's an example of decentralization 10 years ago. How about a more modern, not more modern, I don't want to make people feel old, but what's an example of decentralization happening right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the easiest one to just spot right now, given current events, is going to be the decentralization brought on by COVID-19 or the pandemic. So you don't have to go to a workplace to hold a job these days, or it's encouraged rather that you wouldn't want to do that, assuming you have the skills to work from home. Not only are you able to work for the company you work for from home, but you don't only have to work for that company, assuming they haven't made you sign something that says you can only work for them. You can now freelance from the comfort of your home, making whatever type of money you would like. Doctor visits, you don't have to go to an office. You're able to choose from a network of available online doctors. And that's definitely decentralization away from the current meta of going, or the previous meta of going to a physical location and doing your work. Decentralization is that power moving to the individual's needs. So while the company may have designed their company as a workspace to foster productivity and growth, they're also an end user in this situation because they need employees to keep their revenue going. So the end user is both of you in this case. So the boss says, yes, you can work from home. And the employer says, I need to work from home. So that's a current example of decentralization, and probably one that is the catalyst for the future. And how we will be working in the future.
This means that over the last decade or so, and even at a more exponential rate within the last year due to COVID, that we are becoming a more decentralized society, which suggests that we actually have been, for the better part of the last, couple centuries, a centralistic society. Is that accurate to say, Wes?
Yeah, I would say many aspects of our life are centralized.
So, has it always been this way? How did we get here?
No, not quite. I think now would be a good time, however, for me to share my history education with everyone, sticking to the theme of my college education being your Saturday drive. Today,
that's great.
Today we'll talk about a history lesson. So everyone here at the Life Midwest, all two of us, really love U.S. history, right?
Absolutely. Huge history fan.
All right. Well, this story starts pretty much at the beginning of U.S. history. A couple decades after the Declaration of Independence is wrote and a battle's fought, we have some influential individuals determining what direction the U.S. government will be. On one end, we have Thomas Jefferson. Some of you may be familiar with him. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and he's also on the nickel. The other guy...
Nicolas Cage.
The other guy, definitely Nicolas Cage, but he also goes by Alexander Hamilton, and he is on the $10 bill, and he thought quite a bit differently than Jefferson.
They hated each other, actually, didn't they?
Yeah, a little bit. They definitely weren't great friends there. So Jefferson believed in like a decentralized approach to government. He imagined small agrarian homesteads where, everyone, assuming they were a white male landowner, had one vote to themselves, and there would just be all these farms all around the country sending in their one vote. That's the end of the story, direct democracy. Alexander Hamilton, however, believed in the market. He believed in a centralization of power, so the federal government had power to, levy taxes and wage wars and protect itself. And it's kind of a precursor to what the world's like today. He put the banks in place, or the federal banks in place, and he's very much responsible for the direction the country went in, his ideology a lot, which would be like a federalist approach or a centrist approach to government. And Jefferson was, even though while he was president, he did things that were really against his philosophies, He believed in an agrarian, decentralized nation. And with COVID happening and with us technology just like springing us forward into the future, I think decentralization is actually probably going to win in the longer run.
But it sounds like Hamilton, for the most part, had kind of really influenced what became capitalism today, right? I know he's not the father of capitalism.
Right. That's some Scottish dude.
Right. Some Scottish dude. If that's the case, then what did we have before capitalism then?
That's a great question. I have to admit, I didn't even know what that was until I went to like college. We didn't learn about that in high school or anything. So it's like it's called mercantilism, like merchants, right? So it was, instead of capitalism, where you have a presumably or an ideally free trade environment where someone wants a good or a service, someone produces a good or service for them, and that's the end of the day. A fair transaction, government takes its tax. It was a little bit different from that. It was like the precursor to capitalism, mercantilism. Basically, there would be prices set by the government on commodities, and nations would trade those commodities at those prices, and all money traveled through the leadership, which kind of makes sense why you would need a strong centralized government to compete in that system, especially if you're competing of, let's say, the powerhouse Great Britain at the time, who very much had a mercantile system with global trade. So before it became capitalism and before it was fostered by a powerful government due to democracy, it was more like there's still rulers and leaders and kings, and they decide what they're willing to trade from the producers and then sell it that way and give money back to the producers. It's not capitalism really, but it's the precursor to it. It's what capitalism evolved from. And this is like pre-industrial revolution time. So this is like, imagine New York City, Boston area with like the first manufactories, not like your modern day factory where you have assembly lines and people doing each individual part. That would be a post-industrial revolution thing, after the Ford Motor Company came around. Before that, we had mills, basically just big workhouses, big workstations where you would get someone who's skilled in a certain trade or a general laborer to do as much work as possible with as little of pay as possible for the purpose of completing or creating as many products as possible given the tools you had. So you can look at like a water mill. That would be something you would find during this time. The energy created from the water spinning the wheel in circles gives you enough power to run a mill, for grinding up grains. You would have people using like rudimentary sewing machines, just like en masse sewing a whole bunch of clothes, and stuff like that. So not your modern day factory, and not your modern day market, but something before that. Like imagine you go from nothing, basically, small agrarian towns, people growing their own food and trading that, blacksmiths in remote areas producing the blacksmith for all the people in their area. Now we have these centralized areas of work where a lot of people are moving into the cities, trading their time for money, that being the labor that they offer their employers, and then those products being shipped en masse to different parts of the world for other goods, commodities, and monies.
And so it's moving away from the self-sustained agrarian life.
Right. And it's like the precursor to the city as well. So like that's how the city formed. And then as more power and more wealth happened within cities, we got more technology in cities, more people in the cities became technological savvy. And then we got things like the Industrial Revolution, concentration of a bunch of people who know these skills and tools to use, then automating it to some degree or changing the way it's done to produce even more quicker, better, and faster. And then somewhere in between, the government stepped in and said, no, we believe in this type of fair trade where we don't harvest your goods and send them where they go. Instead, you're responsible for that. We'll just take our taxes, please.
You know, that sounds a lot like a phrase I've heard thrown around called wage slave.
Yeah, I don't think it got its origins there, but that's definitely a great point in American history we can point to and say, I recognize wage slavery from that point on.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you're talking about building centralization and big cities and people moving to that central place to work. You know, and it all starts with, you know, that whole thing of, well, the individual comes in, buys a big plot of land, they claim that territory as their own, then they create factories or places to manufacture products on that land. They hire people with lower income or people who are seeking jobs and seeking income to come and tend to those needs. So they technically own those poor people through rent on the land, taxes on the land, and then the self-imposed prices on goods from within the land, in contrast to what they actually pay the poor employees. So basically it's like this, like all roads lead to Rome, right? Like, they use their vast wealth and ideologies to oppress the working class. Maybe they build a church. Maybe they're friends with the priest at that church. Am I off my rocker here, or am I onto something?
No, I think you're extremely onto something. So not only do they, like, you know, spread their ideologies through, like, the church or whatever, but the more money you have in a government that allows you to basically offer money to politicians to have them see your point of view, you're going to get the money rising to the top through the system itself, but then that money being used to make sure that that system is sustainable, keeping the status quo, as they say. So you hire poor people and quote unquote exploit them, depending on ideology, and then they make you a lot of money, but they're only making enough money to pay you for, you know, the rent that you charge them to live on your land. If you're a big conglomerate, you might even own the grocery stores, and they're paying for that. They're not really getting out of their situation while they're making you a lot of money. And then you take that money and put laws into effect that makes it difficult for them to get out of that situation. And we can see that actually happening today. But interestingly enough, you and I are from the town of Rossford-ish. Well, not from the town of Rossford, but we've lived here for, you know, a while. Right. And Rossford was created as a plot of land for a factory. Guy by the name of Edward Ford. He owns the Edward Ford glass plant at the time. It became Libby Glass and has gone through a bunch of different names. It's why Toledo's called Glass City. But he created the town of Rossford to house his employees, to provide houses and stores and ways for the employees to live so that they could work on his land for his purposes. They were basically his slaves. Just to make a really quick distinction, and I think it's important to know that when we use wage slave, especially since we're talking about these time periods, we don't compare that to chattel slavery. That's obviously much, much, much worse. If you worked for the factories and you didn't work, you just got kicked off the land. You know, you probably, in most circumstances, didn't get brutalized or humiliated in the way you would if you were a subject or victim to chattel slavery. Just a quick disclaimer. But you're trapped either way. So if you live on a manufacturing land that's owned by someone else and you're paying rent to them, are you really ever getting out? Are you building your own equity?
No, you're not. You're a slave to that wage.
And we can see this happen all the time, even today. Adults without money, in my opinion, I feel no longer live for themselves. They don't get the freedom that's guaranteed in our founding documents. You have to pay for shelter, especially if you live here in the Midwest with 4 distinct seasons. You're going to die of exposure or die to the elements if you don't have some type of roof over your head, some type of shelter from the wind, the cold, the wetness, the heat in certain circumstances. So you need to rent a place. You don't own the land, especially if you're poor. You don't, like, no one's going to give you a loan if you don't have money, especially if you don't have built credit. So you're going to work in order to pay your rent to somebody else who owns the place. And that's continual. Your rent just doesn't end. So you're in this constant loop of, I have to work to have a house over my head. I have to work to eat food. I can't just grow food on my land because I'm renting an apartment or I'm renting a land that doesn't permit that within the city limits. So now I have to go exchange my money I'm making from an employer to not only pay for my rent, my food, but in the Midwest, you pretty much have to have a car or rely on public transportation, which isn't very good.
I was just going to say public transportation in the Midwest is horrible, which the infrastructure of it is horrible, I should say, because if you think about it, if we as an entire society were to decentralize, the Midwest would be one of the last places in the country to decentralize, specifically because of the lack of transportation infrastructure compared to major cities. And it's ironic if you think about that, because the whole reason major cities are major cities and have that really deep infrastructure of public transportation is because of wage slavery. But essentially, it's what you need to decentralize as well at the same time.
Yeah, definitely in certain circumstances.
That's just what it feels like to me.
Owning the means to your own everything would be like enable to decentralize. So in order to produce for yourself, whether it be products or food, to be able to transport yourself, whether it be horse or Mustang, to be able to work for yourself, whether it be small scale or large scale, being able to do those things is the keys of decentralization. And a lot of people don't have those options given the rat race they're in and how difficult it is to actually acquire wealth and build equity when you are poor. So in the Midwest, you need a car, which means you need car insurance, which means you need to pay for gas. And the reason you have a car and car insurance and gas is so you can pay for the home you don't own.
So you can go to work and get money and pay.
So you can go to work and get money and then come back and, do it all over again. You're not actually getting out of that loop. Work is life and you work to live and you better be happy about it, or at least that's what your boss will tell you.
I just want to take a quick pause here. This is not a life sucks and then you die episode.
No, that's not what we're trying to get across here. For some people, life does suck and then you die. It's unfortunate, but that's not the takeaway from this episode. So there's this interesting thing I've heard, or I might have even made it up, but it sounds good in my head. I call it the paradox of the technologies, or paradox of new technologies. As new technology that is meant to make life and jobs easier is created, the wealth from the end user who buys that technology sends all their money, or not all their money, but all these people send their money upwards to the manufacturer or distributor or whoever's selling this technology, the guy who owns the patent. That person then receives all that money. So something that's meant to make life easier can inevitably and unfortunately really make life harder. So this brand new revolutionary product comes out. It's going to save you hundreds of hours of years, or hundreds of hours each year on, let's say, a specific task such as automated desk chair. I never have to use my legs to move my butt across the floor. Instead, I can just press a button on my chair and it rolls me away. Sure, that's going to save a bunch of time if you're lazy. This is just an extreme example. The money from buying that goes to the person who made that. That person then receives all that money and can do whatever they wish with that money. They can lobby within the government to make work conditions harder, stricter, or they can make it so social programs are defunded using ideology and their money to get other people to spit their ideology. So it's a fun paradox I thought of. Technology is meant to help us, but the money we spend on technology can always and most likely and will inevitably be the downfall of our freedom.
Technology?
Technology is great, don't get me wrong. It's more of the travel of wealth up because the technology. Let's look at the pandemic. Amazon, great for a pandemic. You can order all your crap at home. You don't have to leave your house. You're able to social distance. You're able to follow rules imposed by the government. And you get your stuff in just a day or two. You can probably get it the next day.
So technology hurts our social mobility. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's a good interpretation of it. I'm not going to come out and explicitly say, yeah, technology makes it so you can't become a millionaire someday, because that's obviously not true. Technology also enables those types of things. But for the end user, when someone advertises, this technology is going to change your life, they might be talking about more than one thing, even if they don't realize it. Sure, it might make your life easier at first, but who's to say all that wealth is going to be used responsibly? Just if you sell 100,000 units of a $100 automatic desk chair, it'd probably be more than that. But for simple math, we're at, what, $10 million that just went up there? To one person from many?
Which is why you should always be skeptical and critically think when you hear or read an advertisement.
Man, it all comes full circle.
I love this show. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, coming up, technology. And can it save us from wage slavery? We'll be back on the other side of the break. Welcome back to the Life Midwest podcast, the only podcast where if you're on our way, we're just going to sneak right past you. It's Kevin alongside your host, West here. Hey, if you're looking for ways to support us, we do have a Patreon that is up and running full steam. You can always, we really appreciate leaving the reviews, subscribing to us on your favorite listening platforms. You can always reach out to any of our socials at The Life Midwest. Email us at support@thelifemidwest. And of course, once we start getting some reactions on some of those avenues, we may or may not be doing some shout outs.
I'd like to give a shout out to my good homie. You know what? I don't have any homies. Sorry.
I'm sitting right here, like 6 feet away from him. And he says that.
He thinks he's a homie.
Anyways, so coming back from the other side of the break, before we talk about technology and how it could save us from wage slavery, which I'm really excited to kind of uncover and unravel a little bit more, this is not a new problem. Wage slavery is not a new problem. I know we talked about it and how it kind of delves back into the history of the small town that Wes and I have spent a lot of time in. But it goes back even further than that, actually, all the way to at least 1847, right, Wes?
Yeah, so pretty much as soon as the market revolution took off, there's people who are observing the world around them, and they're like, hey, yo, hold up. I see some problems here. One of them being, debt slavery, indentured servitude, wage slavery. So in the July 9th edition of The Liberator, it was an abolitionist newspaper back in like the pre-Civil War era. A guy named George Henry, who was a land reformer, accused one of his contemporaries, Garrett Smith, who was a large landowner, market owner, and abolitionist, as being one of the largest owners of slaves. So this guy, a prominent abolitionist, saying, We should free the slaves. It's morally wrong. So this dude kind of claps back at him. Hold up. You own a bunch of land. You own a bunch of market. And you have all these employees living on your land, living in this rat race. And you're telling me you don't own slaves? So like this problem's been around pretty much since it started. People have recognized it and we have plenty of sources. That's just one I like because there's someone who is preaching something other than he's teaching. And this guy called him out for it. Like, okay, that's cool. I think we should free the slaves. But also, don't you got some skeletons in your closet?
So this is not a new issue.
Absolutely not.
But can technology and the future and the growth and evolution of it really help save people from wage slavery? Like, is that a thing?
I very much hope it can be a thing. Like I stated earlier, technology is kind of a double-edged sword. As new technology goes out, that money for the end user buying the technology travels up, and we have that kind of paradox where, well, this helps my life now, but who knows what that money will do later. But I have hope, and I think we know collectively, you know, the science community, the people who study the social sciences, the people who study how the world works, and they have like a broad image of the world. We're able to see in other parts of the world where technology is actually liberating the common wage slave. So first of all, we're experiencing this right now. We're in a rapid race towards full automation. Just a decade ago, we're saying, oh, the robots are going to steal our jobs. People are going to be out of work. Well, that's happening at a rapid pace. And that's because technology has finally made it happen. Robots are cheaper than humans at this point to employ. So that's kind of scary in its own right. Well, all these people are then going to be unemployed, someone might argue. And that's where today's topic really takes off. This isn't just let nature run its course. There's some intervention that will have to happen here. There has to be people within our government that understands what's happening, and they have to be willing to be proactive and tackle the issues before they actually become an issue. So just to take a quick look at what I'm talking about, right now, those with money only need to exploit those without money when they need a job done, right? I want to make more money, but I'm busy doing stuff like networking with other business owners and, you know, really trying to expand my wealth. So I'll just get a bunch of nobodies and pay them nothing to do my work for me. Well, at this point, robots are cheaper than humans. You don't have to pay health insurance on them. You don't have to give them a 401k. You don't have to give them medical leave. And you can run them in a dark factory. You can just automate a factory, turn the lights out, and then monitor it from home.
And these already exist.
These already exist.
Things.
So what's happening to combat that? So technology, like I said, is a double-edged sword. But one of the good parts of it is it's so easy to access information right now. So robots are taking the jobs of humans, and at the same time, simultaneously, humans are becoming extremely educated. You know, the masses are becoming educated. So those without money are in droves working towards social mobility, especially here in the United States. We're getting educations. We're learning how our previous masters think, our wage slavers, the people who own us, the wealthy elites. We're thinking like them. We're learning how they were originally taught, how they're thinking. And we're becoming more embittered and against being ruled unjustly. So it's like the lower and middle class on the rise through education, combining with the you don't really need to exploit humans anymore because technology is taking the place of them in that aspect. And we're having opportunities due to technology where we're able to make extreme gains of wealth out of nothing. Overnight, you can become famous TikTok star because that's technology. You can create a tech company that balloons into $1 billion company within a year. That is people using cutting edge technology.
You can use the internet to be well more versed into the stock market and start investing in the stock market. That itself is technology. I think people hear technology and they think of like robots and AI and things like that, but there's some really basic elements of technology that exist to the everyday person, even the everyday slave wage, or wage slave, to the everyday wage slave. And it provides the foundation for social mobility.
Absolutely. So an important thing to instill in our listeners is something called converging technology. Have you heard of it, Kevin?
I just assume it's when two HDMI cables who love each other very much come together.
Precisely. So converging technologies is quite literally when different and individual technologies grow together, or not, maybe not together, but grow to a point where they can be used together. So a smartphone is a really easy example of converging technology. Well, we had phones for a while. Screens kept getting better. Touchscreen applications became available. AI kept getting better. We're able to make these apps using algorithms. So as all these different technologies, material science got better. We now have Gorilla Glass, 20 or 30 on our phones? Well, 10 years ago it was Gorilla Glass 1. I think they're like at 6 or 7. I'm exaggerating. But like the materials that go into making the phones are also part of it. So every little component that is involved in the creating process and making things happen, the technology that's used is getting to a point where it's sophisticated and everything's coming together. So we have modern technology. And this is happening across the board in everything. Look at automated cars, self-driving cars, electric vehicles, electric solar roofs, new light-efficient lighting, everything. We now have Wi-Fi on our light bulbs.
Let me give you a really, really basic example. All you people who complain about $1,000 smartphones, I want you to take your smartphone out of your pocket, unless you're driving, then just do it later, and think about this. Just look at it. Look at it and think about how many devices in your life has that slab of glass replaced. You no longer need a GPS. You don't care if your car has XM radio or a CD player in it. You don't care about having a tape recorder at home. You don't need to go and buy a new camcorder to record family videos every so often. You don't need to go and buy a computer to edit those family videos on. You don't need to upgrade your current computer or get one if you need somewhere to store those videos. You don't even necessarily need to go out and buy the latest video game console if the games on those app stores of those phones satisfy you. And for a lot of people, they do. I'll tell you right now, Ashley's got a Nintendo Switch. She can play Mario Kart on there, but she can play Mario Kart on her phone. She gives far more of a shit about the convenience about being able to play Mario Kart wherever than the fact that it's a little bit better graphics on the Switch. That's a really prime, basic, everyday example that I think everyone can relate to in a converging technology. And for those who can't, just stick with the 2 HDMI example I gave earlier.
So what can really push us in the direction of decentralization, and what I think will make decentralization possible for the end user, or the people who would generally be subject to working a job, is advances in home manufacturing. Back in the early 1800s, you would move to the city because some rich guy has a mill. Well, now you can have a whole milling device in your home. You can have 3D printers, small scale milling. You're able to order online cheap and good parts to make whatever you want, whenever you want, and it'll probably be delivered in a day or two.
In other words, you used to go and work for somebody else because you didn't have the means to supply those things to do it yourself.
Correct.
And now you can.
We also have at the same time advances in automation, AI, and access to the education required to learn how to harness these technologies. So, to give you an idea, I bought a 3D printer, an entry-level one, for about $149.95, whatever. That's roughly 1/10 of what a brand new phone cost. And I didn't have to pay anything to learn how to use it. I just watched YouTube videos. and I played with it. Fun. So now I have my home manufacturing workshop. There are clients who order parts. Car companies will order small scale or large scale orders of small parts, just like little connectors and random plastic pieces that you go in cars to make them work, or in the interior or whatever. So like there's potential clients out there, and I can do it all from my bedroom if I wanted to. And then there's the whole idea that all the technologies are converging. I would like to give you an example of what life might look like for someone decentralizing. So in this example...
Oh, wait. Before you go. Okay, close your eyes, unless you're driving. Close your eyes and imagine what Wes is talking about.
All right. So you buy a 3D printer because it looks fun. You automate the printer using AI to print continually while you're doing other things. You make a video log of work you've done with your 3D printer. You edit it using modern video editing software and upload it to a popular video aggregate website, think YouTube. You gain various revenue streams through printing functional parts for clients, uploading and monetizing content creation online, and networking with others to grow their market shares respectively. You rinse, repeat. You then buy 10 more 3D printers. You do it bigger and better. Now you have money to reinvest, and you've done it all from home. So you buy a small self-sustainable plot of land where you have access to a workshop to make money with 3D printers and other home manufacturing tools. You have room for a garden to feed yourself, to sustain yourself, and you have a home that fits your needs.
I was going to say, and usually this workshop includes like living quarters of some sort in order to truly decentralize.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's where decentralization ends. We have Thomas Jefferson's agrarian homestead, but with 200 years later, modern technology. And it's not because the government said, do this. It's because technology advanced. It's because of our current system that has so much inequity, the capitalism and the fact that we're pushing products cheaper and quicker and better. You're now able to get this in your home. And this is where we're able to fix that broken system. Now, that's where the decentralization ends. That's like the end user's dream. You're now a slave to nobody. You live on your own land. You're self-sustained. You have food whenever because you have a garden. And you have a stream of revenue, several of them even, because you're a content creationist. Jeez, you're a content creator. And you're also an engineer of sorts, a manufacturer. Now, this is probably what would happen in today's society if gone unchecked. So you just bought this small little homestead, and you have a comfortable life, but you want more money because, the American dream, your neighbor's driving a Ferrari. It's now time for you to drive a Ferrari. So now you hire people at the lowest amount of money possible in order to not cut your bottom line, because obviously you want to make a lot of money. So you hire a few people, maybe hire them on a 1099 or like a independent contractor status, so you don't have to pay their health care or anything. And you pay them the minimum wage that's allowed. They now do your work for you while you do everything else. All right, I'm going to go get more revenue streams. I'm going to go out and market and network. These people aren't getting anywhere in life if they're at the bottom where they're like struggling running the rat race. And those are the only people who would take the lowest paying jobs. It's out of necessity. No one wants to do that. They just will because you need a house or you need a place to stay. So while you're doing that, you are creating a cycle. You've now made your wealth, but now you want to make more wealth and you want to exploit people in the process. Maybe exploitation's not your goal, but it's what you're doing. So now you have all this money, and you're now able to use this money to do as you please. You can lobby the government, as stated earlier, to make it so those wage slaves you own are not able to get out of their positions. You might even create some ideology about it. Oh, they're lazy. That's why they're in that position. I made a bunch of money for myself. Why couldn't they? Not considering their circumstances or why they are where they are. You make a attribution error saying those people right there, they're lazy. They deserve what they get, whatever I'll pay them. And while this is a bit cynical, and I'll acknowledge that, I've seen this happen. This is very true. This is something that happens in a lot of places day to day. Now, how to combat that is the next question. Kevin, do you know how to combat the cyclical nature of exploiting humans?
Yeah, I think at that point you need higher power to intervene. Like you need some government intervention there.
Yes. And this is where our decentralization really, really breaks off from, as we mentioned earlier, how a lot of people see decentralization. Libertarianism. That's basically government off, laissez-faire, let us do what we want. And I know that's really, really watering it down, so I apologize to any libertarians out there. That's not my intent. I'm not trying to throw salt.
We're just trying to explain the overall concept rather than support or endorse a specific set of political ideologies.
Correct. So, just as a thought experiment, if everyone's on your level, you being the person who just built this wonderful life for yourself on an agrarian farmstead, or a manufacturing and agrarian farmstead, if everyone has the same power as you, the same bottom line, the ability to do that for themselves and self-sustain without the need for an outside source of income, there's not really going to be people for you to exploit. And that's where the government comes in. So we see this happening in real time right now. The automation revolution, the technology revolution in full swing, the newest installment of it, a bunch of people are going to lose their job in this defined amount of time, and these robots are going to do the job better and cheaper. And the government, assuming the government has its citizens' best interest in mind, would levy taxes to support the bottom, but not only the bottom. We should support everyone here because it's a big switch for everyone. We support the people who need the support so that they can learn what they need to learn to be successful in the next decade when they're ultimately going to lose a job. You might be saying, well, my job's safe. I do some type of high-skilled job. It is projected that the only jobs that will really remain are jobs that need a human connection. So a psychologist or a therapist, you're going to have your job. It just might look remote. You might be doing it from a computer for the rest of the career. But if there needs to be a human, we obviously can't get rid of that. But teachers, that's going to decentralize. You're going to be teaching from home. Content creators are now, it's like being a movie star these days. You've learned something in school, and now you're teaching it to people on YouTube.
Content creators are probably some of the most decentralized people in our current society.
Absolutely. And they're often taking the role jobs because they're now able to just do it from home as they please. You don't need you don't need credentials to be a YouTube teacher. You need the credentials to be an in-school teacher. So no one's job is safe during this. At first, it's going to go the easier jobs, the ones that are easier to automate: driving, cleaning, menial work, fast food, factory labors.
And it's already heading that way. You already have robots and AI in production. You already have self-service ordering screens at fast food restaurants. You already have autonomous cars, and you already have, I mean, there's just so many examples of how it's already begun. It's not like it's going to be this thing where you wake up tomorrow and it's just going to all be changed, all be decentralized and automated. It's an evolution, but man, has it already begun.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen this. If you haven't, you live under a rock.
Or you're decentralized.
or you're so decentralized that you're off the grid and everything's gravy for you no matter what.
So this foundation that you're talking about for all people, not just the less fortunate, I know this is probably a term that a lot of people have heard, and it might sound scary. But I want to objectively approach that term, and that term is universal basic income.
No.
Just, you'll be all right.
Really?
Yes. Because it's not happening, we're just talking about it. We're talking about the idea of it.
Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God.
Why are you so afraid of it?
I don't understand it, man.
So you're fearing what you don't understand.
Isn't that how it works?
Usually it's usually how it is. That could quickly be a slippery slope into the psychology aspect of decentralization, which we're actually going to talk about next week, but more on that in a little bit. Have you ever been skeptical of this concept? Have you ever been skeptical of the universal basic income? I can't even say if it's a theory, but the science of it, the practice of it.
I have to admit, early into like the days where I was able to like hold my own in thought and conversation, you have to ask the obvious question, well, where the hell's that money coming from? So I'm like, all right, so, and there's also the other standard typical conservative arguments that I would have fell into in the past, which is like, well, if we give everyone everything, they won't want to work for anything. And those are mostly myths. And it comes from the ideology of these wage slavers, the people who want to keep the bottom end working. So we get things like, poor people are lazy. The people who aren't making what I'm making just aren't as smart as me. Sucks to be them. And that's how it goes. We can't just support them. Or if we give them all this money, what will they do? They're not going to work. They have free money. And the evidence doesn't show that. Those are myths. That is not true. In the links here, we can provide sources that show the research. Many countries have done research on this because that's the future. If I'm wrong, I will eat my own shoe. But like I guarantee you'll see universal basic income in your life if you're listening to this podcast.
I'll make sure it's the dirtiest shoe he has, folks.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But no, if you think about it, and it's not like the argument for universal basic income is like giving people, $5,000 a month so that they can get a BMW and shop at Whole Foods and have their iPhone 12 Pro Max and whatever computer they want and whatever house they want. This is more about providing a basic foundation so that even if the shit hits the fan, they're still safe. And the idea behind this is that this enables people to take risks. And that's what you want in a decentralized society, is that you want people to take risks. And one of the main reasons people don't take risks is because they don't have the means to. So the argument is that if people do have some sort of just basic income, again, we're not talking about an exorbitant amount of money, but just a basic piece of security, they're more likely to take a risk and further advance that technology, that human society. Am I hitting the nail here?
Yeah, and I think we've all met at least one person who maybe they own a small business and they're just like, all my funds are tied up into other projects. I'm just not able to do that. I would lose my ass and me and my family would go hungry or whatever. So universal basic income, sure, there's plenty of arguments there for why the bottom end really needs it, why the poorest people really need that. Like the U.S. has 500,000 homeless people right now, which is amazing to me because that's 500,000 people that could be bolstering the economy, getting an education, and turning our country into a powerhouse in the next decade. So there's plenty of obvious arguments why the poorest of poor need universal basic income. But you might argue, well, I make good enough money on my own as a small business owner, or maybe I own a few businesses, maybe I own factories, whatever. You're now able to take your money and play more risky with it. You're able to start new venture opportunities. We don't have to have billionaires walking around as venture capitalists saying, here's some money, spend it wisely. I hope you don't suck at that. Instead, you, the ingenuitive person you are, who owns businesses, who's an entrepreneur, who knows how to really move and make progress within markets, can now act more aggressively without becoming homeless and you and your family starving.
The point of this all is that there are brilliant people out there who don't have the means to get that idea out there, who don't have the resources, Maybe they have the seeds, but they don't have that water, that special water that they need to put on those seeds to grow them, to foster them into something extraordinary. And the argument is that this could be that water that that person needs. Wes, before we start wrapping up here, give me an idea of your version or your vision of decentralization.
All right. So decentralization starts with, number one, policy change. The government has to recognize there are these issues not only happening that have happened throughout history and today, but also issues that will arise in the future. And they need to say, we're willing to combat that. We're willing to put our foot down and make sure that our citizens are both heard and taken care of, because it's in our best interest as the government. But it looks something like this. You, an individual person, make some determined amount of money every month, probably right at the poverty line, just so you're above the poverty line and you're not struggling. That way you can go to school and you can have your rent taken care of while you're really diving into school and learning. That way you can work a job and save money instead of working one job and spending it all for your rent and getting nowhere in life, not gaining any equity or wealth. It looks like what Thomas Jefferson outlined when he was arguing against Hamilton about how the government should be set up. Everyone would be basically self-sustainable. There would be social help from the government, such as, we have unemployment insurance now and we have disability insurance now. It would be another one of those, except for it would be, and I'm not going to decide the terms here on this podcast, but anything from, in the next decade, these many jobs will be lost, and we've collected data and statistics that says this many people will need retraining or job placement training, and we give them the funds to get that done. Maybe that means going to college again. Maybe that means spending a year sabbatical away from everything else in order to learn a new profession. But that's expensive. Having free time is expensive. So what the government would have to do is collect the taxes, and a lot of people are going to hate this, but still remaining apolitical here. This is just what the data suggest. You take the excess money from the top that would otherwise be spent irresponsibly, lavishly, and then we relocate that for everyone to be able to benefit equally. The equal pursuit of life, liberty, and offered justice. So it looks like people working from home, doing pretty much whatever their dreams are, doing whatever they want to do, learning new technologies, becoming extremely educated, extremely smart, and the government helping, but we help the government. If we look at some of the European nations, specifically Scandinavian nations, we can see that there's a lot of social programs that make it so people have a higher quality of life, have better social mobility within their country, or a better chance to move up an income bracket, move up a social sphere bracket. And we would have to replicate one that makes sense for us. Obviously, the U.S. is more like the EU than it is like Norway. It is a collective of countries or a collective of states rather than just one state. So maybe we might see it on the scale of Ohio first. I don't suspect Ohio will be the first one to jump on this, but I think it just has to start with one country. And as far as I'm concerned, each state's its own country with representation within a larger collection, the federal government. So we work from home. We do whatever we want. We have a bottom line or a floor to stand upon. We're not going to end up homeless if we fail. And the data suggests that giving people money won't make them lazy. In fact, it's the opposite. Because you're not stressed all the time, because you have more energy, because you're not spending all your thoughts on how you're going to make your next dollar or how you're going to get out of this rat race, you actually pursue bigger and better things. It happens all the time. And the data just doesn't suggest that because you're on a federal government assistance program, you're going to be lazy or poor. In fact, your social mobility increases. So taxes might look a little higher in this future that I'm seeing. but the programs that the taxes offer are going to be better. We're going to have, I even see the Midwest actually having good public transportation because of technology here shortly. Autonomous, connecting trolley cars. You hail a car, or you go to a location where the car shows up, it goes into a central lane, and then they connect and go where they are and let off where they need to let off. That was revealed at CES 2021. That possibility is there. Sure, it's a concept, but there's no reason that can't exist. The technology for it to exist is there. But being able to not be burdened by the constant flow of your money outward and being able to work for yourself with support from a government that already claims to support you so you can support it. A symbiotic relationship between government, people, and because everyone has a floor to stand on, we won't see the lowest and poorest people be exploited for their labor.
Or suffer. The idea of folks who are lazy and they just want money, sure, those people, I'm sure they exist and they would exist in this future and in this system, but those people aren't going to have any social mobility. They're just going to stay there. Odds are they'd be staying there now. It wouldn't make a difference whether they were given that universal basic income or not. That's what I would argue. But there's one other thing that I want to leave you with before we wrap up here today, and that is this. You may think that you are fine off with the way things are. You may think that you're doing okay. There are people out there who are not, and that's the whole reasoning behind doing this episode, is because you may be fine, but maybe your neighbor isn't. In the America that I was raised in and that I grew up in, you cared about that neighbor. You cared about your fellow human being, that fellow American. You didn't sit here and question and wonder whether they were legal, if they were allowed to be here, if they were welcome here. This is the United States of America. We are a melting pot. And I said at the beginning of this episode that we would stay apolitical, and we are being apolitical when we say this, because that is the idea and the ideas in which this country was founded upon. So I want to really, really encourage you to think about what we talked about today, what Wes's vision was in this. And if you're interested in more of it, go check out some of the sources that we have included in the podcast description. Folks, this has been a really powerful episode. We actually have another leg of this that we want to talk about, that we're going to talk about next week, called the psychology behind human decentralization. And Wes, do you want to give us a very quick preview of that?
Some people are afraid of what they don't know. Other people will be extremely relieved and jubilant when some of their existential problems are resolved. And that guy in the corner spitting profanities, he's just crazy.
So if you're excited about what you heard today, come tune in next Saturday. If you're not excited and you're skeptical, we definitely want you here next Saturday. Folks, it's been a pleasure. This is Kevin alongside Buddy West here. And take it easy. We'll see you next week.
Adios.